There's a wound, a silent, invisible wound, that millions of people carry without even knowing its name. It's a wound that doesn't bleed. It leaves no visible scar, but it shapes every decision, every relationship, every single moment of doubt about your own worth. And that wound is the father wound. Now, I'm not just talking about fathers who were physically absent. I'm talking about something far more common and far more devastating. Fathers who were present in body, but completely absent in spirit. Fathers who lived in the same house, sat at the same table, but never, not even once, truly looked their child in the eye and said what needed to be said. Carl Jung, a renowned psychoanalyst, spent decades studying what he called the father complex, and what he discovered will completely change the way you understand your own story, because there's a list of what every father should have done. And if you're the child of an emotionally neglectful father, this list is going to hurt. It's going to hurt because you'll recognize every item that was missing, every moment that should have existed, but never did. But it will also heal, because naming the wound is the first step to stopping it from silently bleeding. Let me tell you about a man named Michael. Michael was 42 years old when he finally understood why he never felt good enough. Professionally successful, married, 2 kids. From the outside, a perfect life. From the inside, a void that no achievement could ever fill. He described it to me like this: I could win the Nobel Prize, and I'd still think it was just luck, that someone's going to find out I'm a fraud, that I don't deserve any of what I have. Imposter syndrome, you might say, but Carl Jung, he'd go much deeper. Michael's father was a hard-working man, left early, came home late, provided financially without fail, never hit, never yelled, never was obviously cruel, but he also never said a word of validation. When Michael brought home report cards with straight A's, his father glanced over the newspaper, nodded, and went back to reading. When Michael scored his first goal in Little League, his father wasn't there. When Michael got accepted into medical school, his father simply said it was an obligation, not a merit. No hug, no look of pride, no, I'm proud of you. 42 years of life, and Michael had never heard those words from his own father. And the most disturbing part, Michael's father thought he was doing everything right. He worked hard, he paid the bills, he was never violent. In his mind, he was a good father. And that was the problem. Emotional neglect is invisible to those who practice it. The emotionally absent father doesn't see himself as absent. He sees himself as a provider, as a financial protector, as the silent pillar of the family. But silence isn't presence. Provision isn't connection. A roof and food don't replace words of affirmation. Michael grew up with all his material needs met and all his emotional needs ignored. And he spent 42 years thinking the problem was him, that he wasn't grateful enough, that he expected too much, that he should be satisfied with what he had. That seems small to those who haven't lived it, but Carl Jung demonstrated that this absence creates a hole in the psyche that no external achievement can ever fill. Let me explain why. The father archetype represents structure, boundaries, validation, and permission to exist in the world. When a child receives this adequately from their real father, they internalize an inner voice that says, you are capable, you have worth, you can trust yourself. But when the father fails to transmit this, something devastating happens. The child doesn't internalize a positive father figure. They internalize a hole, an empty space where there should be solidity. And they spend their entire life trying to fill that hole with external validation. Michael didn't have imposter syndrome. Michael had an unhealed father wound. The difference is crucial. Imposter syndrome suggests that the problem is in perception. The father wound recognizes that the problem is in the foundation. You don't feel like a fraud because you think wrong. You feel like a fraud because you never received the validation you should have received as a child. And no amount of adult success compensates for what was missing in childhood. Hold on. because now I'm going to show you the list. The list of what every father should have done first. Engaged presence, not physical presence. Emotional presence, looking in their eyes, asking how their day was, and really wanting to know the answer. Sitting on the floor and playing, being available not just physically, but emotionally. Most of the fathers were present in body and absent in soul. Reading the newspaper while their child was talking, watching television while their child tried to show them a drawing. They were there, but they weren't there. Carl Jung would call this a phantom presence. The father's body occupied space, but the father's psyche was somewhere else, and the child felt this absence, even without being able to name it. The result? Adults who don't know what it means to have someone's full attention, who feel invisible, even in relationships, who constantly doubt whether they are important enough to deserve attention. And this affects romantic relationships in a devastating way. Women who had emotionally absent fathers often choose partners who replicate the absence, men who replicate the emotional unavailability of their father, and they spend years trying to extract from unavailable partners what they should have received from their father. Men who had absent fathers often don't know how to be emotionally present for their partners. They replicate the pattern. They're physically there, but their mind is at work, on their phone. Anywhere but in the present moment, the cycle perpetuates because no one taught them differently. Second, unconditional validation. Not validation for achievements, validation for existing. I'm proud of you, not because you got an A, but because you're my son. I love you. Not because you won the game, but because you are who you are. You are enough, not when you do everything right, but always. Most fathers only validated achievements, and sometimes, not even that. The result? Adults who believe they only have worth when they produce. Workaholics who can't rest, because resting means having no value. Perfectionists paralyzed by the fear of failing, because failing means losing the little value they have. Michael was exactly like that. He worked 70 hours a week. He couldn't take vacations. Every project had to be perfect, because imperfection meant he didn't deserve to exist. Third, emotional protection. Fathers should be shields, not shields that prevent any difficulty, but shields that make the child feel that there's someone on their side. No matter what happens, when the world is difficult, I'll be here. There's something I want you to know. When you fail, I won't abandon you. When you're afraid, you can come to me. But the truth is, for so many, their fathers were a source of fear, not protection. Children were more afraid of their father's reaction than the problem itself. They hid difficulties, lied about failures, pretended to be okay just to avoid disappointing him. The result? Adults who don't know how to ask for help, who carry everything alone, who believe vulnerability is weakness, who would rather collapse in silence than admit they need someone. Fourth, permission to feel. Man up. Boys don't cry. Stop being so dramatic. Suck it up. These phrases kill a child's spirit. Fathers should have taught us that all emotions are valid, that anger can be felt and expressed in a healthy way, that sadness isn't weakness, that fear is natural and can be embraced. Instead, most fathers punished emotions, ridiculed crying, ignored fear, repressed any expression that wasn't strength and control. The result? Emotionally constipated adults. Men who don't know what they feel. Women who learned that expressing needs pushes people away. People who explode with rage because they never learned to process smaller emotions before they accumulated. Carl Jung observed that repressed emotions don't disappear. They go into the shadow and return with double the force in moments of stress. The man who never learned to cry explodes with rage in traffic. The woman who was never allowed to express frustration has panic attacks. The child who swallowed everything develops chronic anxiety in adulthood. The emotional repression taught by the father doesn't create strength. It creates an emotional time bomb that can explode at any moment. Fifth, modeling healthy masculinity. Children learn by observing. What the father did was more important than what the father said. If the father treated the mother with respect, the son learned how to treat partners. If the father resolved conflicts with dialogue, the son learned healthy conflict resolution. If the father expressed vulnerability, the son learned that strength includes sensitivity. But most fathers modeled the opposite: authoritarianism, emotional detachment, treating women as inferiors, resolving conflicts with violence, or punitive silence. The result? Men who don't know how to be men without being toxic. Women who choose partners who repeat the father's pattern. Generation after generation, replicating the same dysfunctional patterns. And here, I need to speak specifically about daughters. For a girl, the father is the first model of a man, the first example of what to expect from male figures, the first indicator of how she should be treated. If the father treated the mother with disrespect, the daughter unconsciously learns that disrespect is normal. If the father ignored the daughter, she learns that she doesn't deserve male attention. If the father only validated appearance, she learns that her value is in her body, not in her mind. Carl Jung was clear. The girl's relationship with her father shapes the internal father archetype, the internal masculine, that will influence all future romantic choices. Daughters of negligent fathers often find themselves in relationships with emotionally unavailable men, not by accident, but because the unavailable has become familiar, and familiar is confused with safe. Sixth, guidance without control. Fathers should guide, not control. Offer direction, not dictate destiny. Be available to advise, not demand blind obedience. I see potential in you, and I trust you'll find your way. The truth is, most fathers either controlled excessively or abandoned completely. There was no middle ground. Either you do exactly what I say, or you're on your own. The result: adults who don't trust their own decisions, who need someone telling them what to do in order to function, or the opposite, compulsive rebels, who reject any guidance because they associate guidance with control. Michael had this. He could only work when he had an authoritarian boss telling him what to do. Autonomy paralyzed him. Freedom terrified him, because he had never internalized a father who guided without controlling. And when he finally got a leadership position, he didn't know what to do. He oscillated between being too authoritarian or too permissive. Because he had no internal model of balanced authority, this affects career in a profound way. People with a father wound of control or abandonment frequently sabotage promotions or accept positions they don't want because someone in authority expected it. The voice of the controlling or absent father continues echoing in professional decisions decades later. Seventh, repair after mistakes. Fathers make mistakes. That's inevitable. What matters isn't perfection, but the ability to repair. I was wrong. I'm sorry. I'll do better. These words teach that making mistakes is human, that repair is possible, that relationships can survive rupture. Most fathers never apologized. Mistakes were ignored, denied, or justified. The child learned that she was wrong for feeling hurt. The result: adults who don't know how to apologize, who double down when they're wrong, who end relationships at the first conflict because they never saw that conflict can be repaired. Michael was like this in his marriage. Every argument with his wife became a battle of pride. He couldn't say "I'm sorry" even when he knew he was wrong, because in his family, apologizing was admitting weakness, and weakness was unacceptable. His marriage almost ended because of it, not for lack of love, but for inability to repair, for repetition of the pattern that the father modeled. His wife eventually said, "I don't need you to be perfect. I need you to be able to admit when you're wrong." That phrase changed something in Michael, because it was exactly what he needed to have heard from his father. and never did. That's the list. And if you're feeling a tightness in your chest now, it's because you're recognizing what was missing. But it's okay, because what comes next is even more important. Carl Jung identified 3 paths that children of negligent fathers follow in adulthood. 3 ways of trying to compensate for the hole that was left. The first path is the eternal search for substitute fathers. These are people who spend their entire lives seeking authority figures to validate them. Bosses they admire excessively, mentors they idealize, older partners they put on pedestals. There's nothing wrong with admiring or seeking guidance. The problem is when it becomes compulsive, when you need the approval of father figures to feel you have value, when you repeat the pattern of trying to impress someone who will never give you what you need. Michael did this. Each new boss became the father he was trying to impress, and every time the boss criticized him, he collapsed internally. It wasn't professional criticism, it was paternal rejection. The second path is perpetual rebellion. These are people who compulsively reject any authority, who sabotage every structure, who pride themselves on never obeying anyone. It looks like freedom, but it's a prison, because compulsive rebellion is as controlled by the father complex as compulsive obedience. You're not free from your father. You're defining your entire identity in opposition to him. Carl Jung called this negative identification. You become the exact opposite of your father, but you're still defined by him. Reactive rebellion isn't freedom. It's inverted slavery. The rebel who rejects all authority is still obeying his father. He's obeying the silent command to never be like him. But being the opposite is still being defined by the same reference point. True freedom would be choosing authority when it makes sense and rejecting it when it doesn't, without compulsion in either direction. The third path is unconscious replication. These are people who swear they'll never repeat their father's pattern, but end up doing the exact same thing. Absent fathers creating absent children, the generational cycle perpetuating itself because awareness isn't enough to break it. Let me delve deeper into this third path, because it's the most dangerous and the most common. Unconscious replication happens because complexes operate automatically. You don't choose to act like your father. You simply act. The pattern is so deeply ingrained that it seems natural. Michael swore he would be different. He swore he would be present. He swore he would say the words he never heard. And for years, he failed miserably. Not because he was evil, not because he didn't care, but because the complex was stronger than his conscious intention. Jung explained this precisely. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Michael was being controlled by the father complex, the same pattern that his father had, and his father's father before him, was operating automatically. And here's the most painful part. Michael only realized he was replicating the pattern when he saw the same expression on his own son's face that he had at 7 years old. That look of dying hope, that moment of resignation, that instant when the child learns that he isn't important enough to deserve full attention. It was devastating. But it was also a wake-up call. Hold on, because now I'm going to show you how Michael broke the cycle. It was at 43 years old, a year after understanding his father wound, that Michael had a moment of choice. His 7-year-old son came to show him a drawing. Michael was on his cell phone, answering work emails. He did exactly what his father used to do, glanced over, mumbled something, and went back to the screen. And then he saw his son's face, the same expression he himself had at 7 years old, that mixture of dying hope and nascent resignation. That exact moment when the child learns that he isn't important enough. Michael put down his cell phone, sat on the floor looked at the drawing for real, and said what his father never said. "This is amazing. Tell me about it. I want to know everything." His son lit up, literally lit up. And Michael cried, not in front of his son, later, alone in the bathroom, because at that moment he felt two things simultaneously. First, the pain of realizing that he was repeating the pattern. Second, the possibility of choosing differently. Jung would call this a moment of individuation. The instant you become aware of the complex and choose to act differently, even when the automatism pulls you towards the old pattern. But here's the truth that few people talk about. This moment of awareness isn't enough. You'll have to choose consciously hundreds, thousands of times, because the complex doesn't disappear with an insight. It weakens with repeated choices over time. Michael still feels the pull to check his phone when his son wants attention. The difference is that now he perceives the pull and chooses to resist. You've just discovered the 7 elements that your father should have given you, and probably never did. You've just understood the 3 paths that adults with a father wound follow, and you've just seen how it's possible to break the cycle. This kind of deep psychological knowledge isn't taught anywhere. Universities simplify. The media ignores it. Few channels have the depth to explore Jung applied to childhood wounds. When you click Super Thanks, you're not just supporting a channel. You're saying that this kind of content matters, that the truth about how fathers shape children deserves to be known. That healing is possible when we understand the mechanism of the wound. It's not payment, it's a statement. You're choosing consciousness over automatism, healing over repetition, truth over denial. What about you? You might be thinking it's too late, that the wound is too old, that you've already replicated the pattern with your own children. Let me tell you something that Jung made very clear. It's never too late for individuation. It's never too late to choose differently. If you're a parent now, you can start today. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be conscious. Look into your child's eyes when they speak. Not at your phone. In their eyes. Say, "I'm proud of you," for no reason. Not for grades. Not for achievements. Just for existing. When you mess up, repair. Apologize. Show that adults also make mistakes, and that making mistakes doesn't mean the end. You will fail. That's guaranteed. But now you can fail consciously and repair, instead of failing automatically and denying. If you don't have children, the healing is different but equally possible. You can become your own internal father. You can give yourself what you never received. This sounds abstract, but it's very concrete. When the internal critical voice says, "You're not good enough," you can consciously respond. That's the father complex talking. It's not the truth. When you fail and want to punish yourself, you can choose to treat yourself with the kindness your father should have shown. And when you achieve something and want to minimize it, you can deliberately stop and say, "My mom, I did this, and it was good." Reparenting isn't magic. It's practice. It's repeated choice. And it's a process that takes time. Years, not weeks. You're undoing decades of programming. It won't happen with one insight or a YouTube video. But each conscious choice weakens the complex. Each moment of self-compassion heals a part of the wound. Every time you treat yourself as your father should have treated you, you're building the internal father that was missing. This isn't superficial self-help. It's deep work of psychic reconstruction. And Carl Jung knew that this work is possible at any age. Let me give you a concrete exercise that Michael used. Every night, before going to sleep, he would ask himself a question. What should my father have said today that I can say to myself? If he'd had a difficult day, he would say internally, "You did the best you could. Tomorrow is another chance." If he had achieved something, he would say, "I'm proud of you." If he had failed, he would say, "To err is human. You don't lose your worth by making mistakes." And it seemed ridiculous at first. A 43-year-old man talking to himself as if he were a child. But that's exactly what needed to happen, because the wounded child within him had never heard those words. And now, finally, he was hearing them. 2 years after that moment on the floor with his son, something changed. For the first time in his life, Michael took a real vacation, 3 weeks without work, and he didn't feel like he was going to die of anxiety. Something had changed internally. The voice that said you only have worth if you produce was weaker. It hadn't disappeared, but it was weaker. And most importantly, his 9-year-old son was different from Michael at 9 years old. When people asked his son what he wanted to be when he grew up, he didn't say doctor or lawyer to impress. He said what he really wanted, without fear of disappointing, without fear of not being good enough, because Michael had given his son what he never received. And by breaking the cycle with his son, Michael was healing himself. Jung wrote that the greatest influence on a child is the unlived life of the parents, the unrealized dreams, the unhealed wounds, the unintegrated shadows of the parents are automatically projected onto the children. But the reverse is also true. When you consciously heal your wounds, you stop projecting them. When you choose differently, you break the chain. Your father wound doesn't have to be the wound of your children. The story doesn't have to repeat itself. There's one last thing I need to tell you. If your father is still alive, you may be wondering if you should confront him, if you should demand what you never received. If you should finally have the conversation that never happened. Jung would be careful here. Confronting the real father rarely heals the wound, because healing doesn't depend on him changing. Healing depends on you integrating what was missing internally. Some fathers, when confronted, offer genuine apologies. That can help, but it's not necessary. Other fathers deny, justify, or attack. That can re-traumatize, and it's not worth the risk. The true healing happens when you stop expecting from the real father what he will never give. When you develop an internal father who provides structure, validation, and permission to exist. Your father may have failed. That doesn't mean you're doomed to repeat the failure. It means you have work to do. Internal work. Work of consciousness. Work of repeated choice. And that work is possible. Michael proved it. Thousands of people prove it every day. The father wound is real, but healing is also real. And healing doesn't depend on your father changing. It doesn't depend on him apologizing. It doesn't depend on him recognizing what he did or failed to do. Healing depends on you, on your consciousness, on your repeated choices, on your willingness to do the internal work that he should have done for you. You've just discovered what your father should have done and never did. You've just named the wound that you may have carried since childhood. Now tell me in the comments, which of the 7 elements was most lacking in your childhood? Which one do you feel left the deepest hole? Or maybe you've already started the healing work. Maybe you're already giving your children what you never received. Comment below. Share your experience. Because each shared story helps others recognize that they're not alone, that the wound is common, and that healing is possible. Write it down there. I'm reading every comment.